The Liminal Voyage by Edwina Longbottom. Chapter 1. A Dream Deferred. Ethan Marsh awoke to the persistent hum of the city beyond his apartment window. The morning light filtered reluctantly through the thin curtains, casting fragmented shadows on the walls of his modest one-bedroom flat. Despite the familiar sound of his alarm clock blaring, something about today felt different, electrified, as if the air itself carried the promise of transformation. The small space around him reflected his relentless pursuit of a dream. His desk, littered with coffee-stained notes and tangled cords, stood as a monument to countless sleepless nights. The glow of a laptop still hummed faintly, a testament to his latest round of coding that stretched into the early hours. Ethan rubbed his eyes, dragging himself upright with a sense of urgency that had nothing to do with the alarm and everything to do with possibility. Today could mark the beginning of the life he had always imagined. Born and raised in Pine Hollow, a small town tucked between endless fields and weathered mountains, Ethan had always dreamed of more. While his peers found comfort in the routine of their rural upbringing, Ethan saw the horizon as an invitation. His parents, however, grounded their lives in practicality. His mother, a devoted nurse, instilled the values of steady work and sacrifice, while his father, a mechanic with grease-stained hands, spoke in the language of toil and resolve. Their love for Ethan was unwavering, yet it often felt like an anchor tethering him to a life he longed to outgrow. But Ethan was a diver, not a drifter. Through scholarships, part-time jobs, and an unyielding belief in his vision, he had clawed his way to a college education and, eventually, to this moment. His startup, a technological bridge to foster human connection in a disconnected world, was his answer to the isolation he often felt growing up. It was his way of proving that boundaries, whether geographical or emotional, could be overcome. This particular morning, Ethan dressed quickly, his movements sharp and deliberate. The usual clutter of his apartment was ignored as he grabbed a granola bar and his satchel. Today was the day he would present his pitch to a group of potential investors, a chance to turn his ideas into something tangible. As he locked the door behind him, his phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends who had stood by him throughout his journey. "Good luck, Ethan," read one. "Knock 'em dead," read another. Stepping onto the chaotic streets of the city, he felt the pulse of the metropolis in every step. The air was thick with the sounds of horns, voices, and footsteps, a symphony of ambition and desperation. The towering skyscrapers seemed to lean in, listening to the dreams whispered by the millions who moved beneath them. Ethan was one of those dreamers, and today he felt the city's rhythm aligning with his own. Crossing the busy intersection at Lexington and Fifth, Ethan's focus wavered for a moment. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering to the pavement. He bent to retrieve it, oblivious to the horn blaring nearby. Time seemed to fracture. A split second stretched into eternity. A screech of tires, the sharp intake of gasps from bystanders, and then impact. The world dissolved into noise and pain. Cold asphalt met warmth as Ethan crumpled to the ground, the cacophony around him fading into a numbing void. For a fleeting moment, he thought of Pine Hollow, of his mother's stories beneath the stars and his father's steady hands. Then, the darkness claimed him. Chapter 2. Between Two Worlds. Ethan's first sensation was an overwhelming stillness. No sound, no pain, just a peculiar calm that felt foreign, in contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. Slowly, awareness returned, but not in the way he expected. His vision was no longer tethered to his body. He was floating above the scene of the accident, detached and weightless. Below him, the street was a tableau of frozen chaos. A small crowd had gathered around his crumpled form, lying motionless on the asphalt. Faces blurred in and out of focus, and the flashing red lights of an ambulance painted the scene in pulses of urgency. Ethan felt neither fear nor panic as he watched. Instead, there was an eerie detachment, as though he were merely an observer in someone else's story. Time seemed to unravel, stretching into something malleable and strange. He felt suspended in a void, weightless and timeless. Then, like a floodgate opening, his memories began to cascade through him, not in fragments, but as a vivid reel of his life playing on an infinite loop. He saw himself as a child, his laughter echoing in the fields of Pine Hollow as he chased fireflies with his sister under a summer sky. He saw his grandmother's face, etched with age yet alight with wisdom, as she wove her fantastical tales of heroes and distant lands. Those stories had planted the seeds of wonder and ambition in him, a gift he hadn't realized until now. Scenes from his teenage years followed, marked by the tension of growing up. Heated arguments with his father about chasing impractical dreams replayed like old wounds reopening. Yet amidst the conflict, there were moments of silent understanding, like the night his father handed him a well-worn toolkit and simply said, "You'll need this someday." College years raced by next. Late nights in the library, friendships forged over shared struggles, and the quiet heartbreak of first love lost to the passage of time. These were the years that shaped him, teaching him resilience and the value of persistence. The reel slowed as it approached the present. His burgeoning startup, his aspirations to bridge the gap between people through technology, and the quiet moments of self-doubt he rarely admitted to anyone. These memories lingered the longest, hovering like unfinished sentences, questions without answers. As the reel faded, Ethan became aware of something new, a gentle pull, like an unseen force beckoning him forward. Turning his attention to the void around him, he saw it, a tunnel of light, glowing with an intensity that was neither blinding nor harsh but inviting. Its luminescence wrapped around him like a warm embrace, whispering promises of peace and clarity. Compelled, Ethan allowed himself to drift toward it. The earthly scene below, the city streets, the ambulance, the frantic attempts to save him blurred and dissolved into nothingness. The tunnel expanded, enveloping him entirely, and he was transported into a realm unlike anything he could have imagined. The skies here were not skies at all, but rivers of light that shimmered and flowed in endless patterns, shifting colors with a beauty that defied comprehension. The ground beneath his feet felt both solid and fluid, responding to his movements as though it were alive. The air was thick with a hum, a vibration that resonated deep within him, filling him with a sense of profound belonging. For the first time since the accident, Ethan felt whole, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. He could feel the boundaries of his earthly existence dissolving, replaced by a vastness that offered infinite potential. Yet, beneath the wonder, a question lingered. What was this place, and why was he here? Before he could dwell on it further, a soft voice, though not a voice in the conventional sense, spoke to him. It was more a presence, an essence that communicated directly with his thoughts. "You are between worlds, Ethan Marsh," it said. "A place where paths converge and choices are made. Here, the echoes of your life meet the possibilities of your soul." The words or thoughts were both comforting and unsettling. Ethan realized he was not alone in this place. Shapes began to emerge from the periphery of his vision, beings composed of light and energy, their forms flickering with a luminescence that shifted like the waves of a distant ocean. They did not speak, yet he understood their presence as a call to explore, to discover what lay beyond the boundaries of his understanding. Ethan took a tentative step forward, and the beings seemed to respond, their light brightening as though in approval. He didn't know where this path would lead, but he felt a deep certainty that he needed to follow it. The journey into the unknown had begun. Chapter 3. The Inhabitants of the Ether. Ethan moved through the surreal landscape, his steps weightless, each one propelling him deeper into this enigmatic realm. The boundaries of reality blurred with each passing moment. Here, the skies rippled with prismatic hues, liquid light flowing as if stirred by unseen winds. Ethereal orbs of energy drifted past, their glows faintly pulsing like distant stars. Despite the vastness, he didn't feel lost. There was a sense of purpose, as if this place had been waiting for him. The beings of light appeared again, their presence a harmony of energy and understanding. They didn't speak, yet Ethan understood them through impressions, flashes of emotion, images, and ideas that filled his mind in an instant. The first to approach was a luminous figure, shimmering in shades of deep blue. Its form flickered, yet it radiated an aura of calm and empathy that seemed to resonate with his own pulse. "You seek connection," the blue entity communicated, its thoughts brushing against his own like the soft strum of a harp. Instantly, Ethan understood that these beings perceived him as more than the sum of his parts. They saw his essence, his aspirations, doubts, and the intricate web of connections that defined him. Through a cascade of images, the blue entity revealed the interwoven nature of existence. Ethan saw glimpses of people he had encountered in his life: the classmate who had shared her notes when he was struggling, the barista who always smiled despite long, tiring shifts, and even the stranger who once helped him change a flat tire on a rainy night. Each interaction, no matter how fleeting, was a thread in a larger tapestry. The vision expanded, showing how these threads rippled outward, touching lives far beyond his own. His decision to start his tech company, for instance, had inspired his roommate to pursue his own creative projects. Friends and acquaintances were emboldened by Ethan's determination, even if they never told him directly. The realization was humbling. Ethan had always thought of his startup as a personal mission, but now he saw it as part of something much greater. The entity's light dimmed slightly, signaling the end of its message. Then, with a graceful flicker, it drifted away, leaving Ethan standing in the vibrant stillness of the ether. Another figure emerged, this one a golden orb radiating a soft, warm glow. Its presence felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, invigorating and inspiring. The golden entity conveyed a series of rapid, breathtaking visions: gardens blooming in impossible landscapes, cities brimming with harmony and creativity, and innovations that brought people together in ways Ethan had only dreamed of. Each image was a testament to human potential, a vivid reminder of what could be achieved when ambition was paired with compassion. Yet, as the images played out, shadows began to creep into the periphery of his vision. Ethan saw failures born from fear, ambition twisting into greed, and opportunities lost to hesitation. The golden entity seemed to pause, acknowledging these darker truths. Creation and destruction are bound together, it communicated, its tone one of somber wisdom. Dreams carry the weight of responsibility. Ethan nodded, absorbing the lesson. He had always been driven by his dreams, but he hadn't fully considered the ripple effects of his actions, the lives his success might touch, for better or worse. The entity lingered for a moment longer before dissolving into the kaleidoscopic light. As he ventured further, more beings approached. Some pulsed with ancient wisdom, their forms dense and steady, like the roots of a towering tree. Others flitted by with the playful energy of a summer breeze, their light dancing in patterns that felt almost mischievous. Each encounter added to Ethan's understanding, revealing facets of himself and the universe that had previously been hidden. One being, an intense silver light, stood out from the rest. Its energy was sharp, almost electric, and it communicated not through images, but through questions. "Why do you fear failure?" it asked, the words echoing in his mind like thunder. The question startled Ethan. He had always told himself that failure was a stepping stone, a necessary part of success. But here, stripped of pretense, he realized the truth. Failure terrified him because it felt like a betrayal of those who had believed in him. His parents, his friends, his mentors, they had all invested their time, energy, and love into his journey. What if he let them down? The silver entity seemed to sense his thoughts. "Fear can bind or free," it said, its tone neither judgmental nor comforting. "The choice is yours." Ethan's mind churned with the weight of the message. He had spent so much time running from failure that he hadn't considered its potential to teach, to reshape, and to refine. Perhaps fear wasn't an obstacle, but a tool, a blade that, if wielded correctly, could carve a path forward. The silver light faded, leaving Ethan alone once more. He stood in the vibrant expanse, his thoughts a storm of questions and realizations. This place, this realm between worlds, was not merely a sanctuary. It was a crucible, a space designed to challenge, enlighten, and transform. As he gazed at the ever-shifting horizon, Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude. The beings had shown him that his journey was far from over. Whether he stayed in this realm or returned to the world he had left behind, he carried with him a new understanding of what it meant to dream, to create, and to connect. For the first time since his arrival, Ethan smiled. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was his to walk. Chapter 4. Echoes from the Living World. While Ethan roamed the luminous expanse of the ether, the world he had left behind continued to spin, caught in the throes of shock, grief, and uncertainty. On the surface, his absence was marked by small, almost imperceptible disruptions: An empty seat at the table, a missed email response. But for those closest to him, the void he left felt cavernous. In Pine Hollow, Ethan's parents sat side by side in the dim light of their living room. The space was silent, except for the faint hum of the heater. Mrs. Marsh, her hands clasped tightly around a mug of chamomile tea, stared at the phone on the coffee table. It hadn't rung in hours, and the waiting gnawed at her resolve. Mr. Marsh, ever the stoic, occupied himself with a mechanical project, a carburetor from an old Chevy he'd been restoring. The rhythmic sound of his tools was his only shield against the unbearable weight of helplessness. Their son's ambition had always been a point of contention between them. While Mrs. Marsh admired Ethan's drive, she worried about the toll it took on his health and happiness. Mr. Marsh, on the other hand, had struggled to understand Ethan's departure from the straightforward life he himself had chosen. Yet now, with Ethan lying unconscious in a hospital room miles away, their differences seemed trivial. What remained was a shared ache, a love so fierce it threatened to consume them. In the city, Ethan's roommate, Tim, paced the length of their apartment. The space felt too quiet without the constant click of Ethan's keyboard or the hum of his late-night brainstorming sessions. On the desk, a half-empty mug of coffee had gone cold, untouched since the morning of the accident. Tim ran a hand through his disheveled hair and opened Ethan's laptop, its screen lighting up with the startup's prototype interface. Tim wasn't a coder, but he understood enough to see the brilliance in Ethan's vision. A network designed not for likes or shares, but for genuine human connection. It was Ethan's way of addressing the loneliness he had seen in the world, and in himself. Tim's chest tightened as he stared at the lines of code, wondering if he could somehow keep the dream alive in his friend's absence. On the streets where the accident had occurred, a small shrine had taken shape. Candles flickered in the cold evening wind, their light reflecting off photographs, handwritten notes, and flowers laid by strangers who had heard about Ethan's story. A hastily scrawled sign taped to a lamppost read, "Dreamers are the heartbeat of the world. Don't stop dreaming, Ethan." The scene was a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the hospital where Ethan lay. Machines beeped in rhythmic patterns, a testament to the fragile tether keeping him tied to life. Nurses moved quietly around him, their faces unreadable as they adjusted his IVs and monitored his vitals. Back in the ether, Ethan was unaware of these ripples. His exploration had taken him to a quiet corner of the prismatic realm, where the vibrant skies seemed to dim and the ever-present hum softened into a low murmur. Here, the boundary between worlds felt thinner, as though he could almost reach out and touch the life he had left behind. A new entity appeared, its light neither bright nor dim, but steady and calming. This being, unlike the others, exuded a sense of connection to both the ether and the living world. It approached Ethan slowly, its form coalescing into something more tangible, a figure vaguely human in shape, though still composed of shimmering light. "You linger between two worlds," the entity said, its voice resonating in Ethan's mind like a familiar melody. "Do you not feel the echoes of those who call to you?" Ethan hesitated. He had been so engrossed in the wonders of this realm that he hadn't considered how his absence might be affecting the world he'd left. The entity extended a hand, or something like a hand, toward him. "See for yourself." The air around them shimmered, and suddenly Ethan was no longer in the ether. He stood in his childhood home in Pine Hollow, watching his parents sit in their living room. His mother's face was pale and drawn, her fingers trembling as she lifted the mug to her lips. His father's hands worked methodically, but Ethan could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched each time the phone didn't ring. The scene shifted, and Ethan found himself back in his apartment. Tim was at his desk, staring at the prototype on the laptop screen. His eyes were bloodshot, his fingers hovering hesitantly over the keyboard. Ethan's heart ached as he realized the weight Tim was carrying, the guilt and determination intertwined as his friend tried to keep Ethan's dream alive. Finally, Ethan stood at the edge of the shrine on Lexington and Fifth. The sight of the candles, the notes, the strangers pausing to pay their respects, it overwhelmed him. These people didn't know him, yet they had taken the time to honor him, to keep his story alive. The vision faded, and Ethan found himself back in the ether, His chest heaved as though he had been holding his breath. The entity's light pulsed softly, a silent encouragement. Your choices ripple through the lives of others, it said. You are not bound to one path, but the decisions you make shape more than just yourself. Ethan sat in the quiet of the ether, his mind swirling with thoughts of home, of Tim, of the strangers who had unknowingly become part of his story. For the first time, he felt the weight of his journey not as a burden, but as a responsibility, a chance to honor the connections that had shaped him. Chapter 5. The Choice of Passage. Time in the ether moved differently, its flow unbound by earthly constraints. Ethan sat at the edge of a shimmering lake that mirrored the shifting skies above, his reflection rippling with hues of blue and gold. The visions he had seen, his parents' quiet resilience, Tim's determination, the stranger's tribute, lingered in his mind, weighing heavily on his heart. For all the wonders of this realm, the pull of the world he'd left behind grew stronger with each passing moment. As if sensing his inner turmoil, the luminous beings began to gather around him. Their forms radiated a quiet reverence, their light flickering in harmony with the lake's surface. Among them, the azure entity stepped forward, its presence both comforting and commanding. The time has come to choose, Ethan, it said, its voice resonating like a chord struck on a celestial harp. You stand at a crossroads. Will you remain in this realm of infinite potential, or will you return to the constraints and beauty of the mortal world? Ethan looked up at the entity, his thoughts a storm of uncertainty. What happens if I stay? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. The azure being paused, its light dimming as if in reflection. Here, you would be free from the limitations of the physical world. Your thoughts would shape reality, your dreams given form without opposition. Yet this freedom comes at a cost. The ties that bind you to the world of the living will fade, leaving only memories of what you once were. And if I return, Ethan pressed, you will face the struggles of mortality, the pain, the failures, the uncertainty, the entity replied. But in those struggles lies the opportunity to grow, to connect, and to create a legacy that extends beyond yourself. The choice is not between ease and hardship, but between stasis and evolution. Ethan turned his gaze back to the lake, his reflection now joined by faint images of his life, his parents' loving yet weary faces, Tim hunched over his laptop, the candles flickering on the street corner shrine. He thought of the startup, the dream he had nurtured to bridge the gaps between people. It wasn't just a project, it was a part of him, a promise he had made to the world. The other beings began to hum, their light pulsating in rhythm. It wasn't pressure or coercion, it was encouragement, a reminder that whatever choice he made would be his alone. Ethan closed his eyes, allowing the memories to wash over him. He thought of the first time his mother had told him he could do anything he set his mind to, her voice filled with unwavering belief. He remembered the quiet pride in his father's eyes when he had fixed his first engine, a moment of connection unspoken but deeply felt. He thought of Tim, who had stood by him through every failure, every setback, and who now carried his dream forward with steadfast determination. I know my choice, Ethan said finally, his voice steady. He opened his eyes, meeting the azure entity's gaze. I want to return. The entity's light brightened, its glow enveloping Ethan in a cocoon of warmth. The other beings hummed in approval, their energy merging into a single, harmonious resonance. Your journey in the mortal realm continues, the azure being said. Carry with you the wisdom of this place, and remember that your actions ripple through the lives of others. You are never truly alone. The light intensified, and Ethan felt a gentle pull, as though he were being drawn backward through the ether. The shimmering lake, the prismatic skies, and the luminous beings began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of weight and solidity. The hum of the ether gave way to the faint beeping of a heart monitor, the sterile scent of antiseptic, and the distant murmur of voices. Ethan opened his eyes to find himself in a hospital room, the fluorescent lights harsh against his retinas. His mother was the first to notice, her gasp breaking the silence. Ethan? She whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. His father stood frozen, a wrench still in his hand from the carburetor he had been working on at Ethan's bedside. Slowly, he placed it down, his usually stoic expression melting into one of unrestrained relief. Son, he said gruffly, his voice thick with emotion, Ethan tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm here," he managed, the words carrying more weight than he realized. His mother clasped his hand, her tears falling freely, while his father placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. In their touch, Ethan felt the tether to his life solidify, the love and resilience of those who had waited for him anchoring him firmly in the present. As the room filled with the sounds of reunion, Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. The echoes of the ether still lingered in his mind, a reminder of the journey he had undertaken. He had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to dream, to create, and to connect. The path ahead would be difficult, but it was one he was ready to walk, step by step. Chapter 6: Homecoming. Ethan's recovery was neither quick nor easy, but each day brought him closer to reclaiming the life he had left behind. The hospital room, once a sterile limbo of beeping machines and fluorescent lights, gradually became a place of renewal. His parents were his constant companions, their love and presence steady anchors in his return to the mortal world. His mother often brought books to read aloud, her voice soothing as she chose passages she thought would inspire him. His father, though less vocal, spent hours fixing small gadgets at Ethan's bedside, a quiet but meaningful gesture. Together, they filled the silence with warmth, their presence a reminder of the bonds that had brought Ethan back. Physically, Ethan faced a daunting road. His body, still weakened from the accident, required time and effort to heal. Physical therapy sessions were grueling, pushing him to the limits of his endurance. Yet, with each painful step and hesitant stretch, he felt the strength returning, not just to his limbs, but to his resolve. Mentally, the challenge was even greater. The memory of the ether remained vivid, its beauty and lessons etched into his soul. At times, he struggled to reconcile the vastness of that otherworldly realm with the constraints of the physical world. But he reminded himself that his choice to return was not a rejection of the ether, but an embrace of the life he had yet to fully live. As the weeks passed, visitors trickled in. Tim arrived first, his relief palpable as he saw Ethan awake and alert. The two friends spoke in low, earnest tones, their conversation a mix of updates about the startup and heartfelt admissions of how much they'd missed each other. "I opened your laptop," Tim admitted, his cheeks flushing slightly. "I wanted to keep your work alive, just in case." Ethan smiled, his gratitude clear. "Thank you," he said, his voice still soft but steady. "It means everything to me. But now, it's our work, Tim. We're in this together." Tim's eyes brightened, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt the spark of possibility reignite. The startup wasn't just a dream deferred, it was a dream rekindled. Once discharged from the hospital, Ethan returned to his apartment, a space that felt both familiar and foreign. The desk, still cluttered with his notes and cables, stood as a silent witness to his journey. He approached it slowly, running his fingers over the scattered papers. The vision he had seen in the ether of his startup flourishing echoed in his mind, urging him forward. He began working with a renewed sense of purpose, his time divided between refining the prototype and reconnecting with the people who had supported him. Tim became his closest collaborator, the two of them spending late nights brainstorming and troubleshooting. Ethan's parents, though not tech-savvy, found ways to contribute, his mother offering words of encouragement, his father quietly fixing the small appliances that had been neglected in Ethan's absence. Beyond the work, Ethan sought to honor the connections he had once taken for granted. He reached out to old friends, rekindling relationships that had faltered under the weight of his ambition. He volunteered at local community centers, offering workshops on technology and its potential to bridge gaps. Each interaction reminded him of the lesson the ether had taught him, that every life was a thread in the greater tapestry of existence. The shrine at Lexington and Fifth became a place of pilgrimage for Ethan. Standing there, he felt the weight of the candles, the notes, the flowers left by strangers. He read each message, some addressed to him, others simply expressing solidarity with the idea of hope and perseverance. It was humbling to see how his story had resonated with people he had never met. One day, as he stood at the shrine, an elderly woman approached him, her hands clasping a small bouquet of daisies. "You're the young man they've been praying for," she said, her voice kind and filled with wonder. I've walked past this spot every day since it happened, and I always wondered if you'd pull through." Ethan nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. "I did," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Thanks to people like you." She smiled and placed the daisies among the other offerings. "Keep dreaming," she said simply before walking away, leaving Ethan with a sense of gratitude that seemed to fill the air around him. As the months passed, Ethan's startup began to take shape in ways he had only dared to imagine. The prototype evolved into a fully functional platform, its core principles rooted in the lessons he had learned. It wasn't just about technology, it was about people, fostering genuine connection in a world often fractured by superficial interaction. The launch event was held in a modest venue, the room filled with friends, investors, and members of the tech community who had followed Ethan's journey. Tim stood by his side as they unveiled the platform, their presentation met with applause and curiosity. Ethan felt a surge of pride, not just for the product, but for the people who had made it possible. After the event, as the crowd mingled, Ethan stepped outside for a moment of solitude. The night sky stretched above him, clear and vast, reminding him of the prismatic skies of the ether. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, and whispered a silent thank you to the beings who had guided him. He was home, not just in the physical sense, but in his purpose, his connections, and his resolve. The path forward was uncertain, but it was one he was eager to walk. Chapter 7: Beyond the Horizon. The startup's launch marked a turning point in Ethan's life, not just professionally, but personally. What had started as an ambitious dream now blossomed into a living, breathing reality, a platform that connected people in ways that went far beyond likes, shares, or fleeting interactions. The platform wasn't just a product, it was a bridge, built from the lessons he'd learned in both worlds. Months turned into seasons, and the startup flourished. Its impact rippled outward, inspiring stories of reconnections, newfound friendships, and even communities rallying around shared causes. Ethan watched it grow with a quiet satisfaction, knowing it had become more than he ever imagined. But success brought with it new challenges, ones that required him to balance his ideals with the practical demands of running a company. Tim proved to be an indispensable partner, his creativity and enthusiasm often carrying them through late nights and difficult decisions. Their friendship deepened, forged in the crucible of shared dreams and relentless effort. Together, they navigated the complexities of scaling their vision, ensuring the platform stayed true to its purpose even as it expanded. One crisp autumn evening, Ethan found himself alone in the office, bathed in the soft glow of his computer screen. The city outside was alive with the hum of distant traffic and the flicker of lights stretching to the horizon. Yet, his mind wandered to the ether and the beings who had guided him. Their words still resonated. Your choices ripple through the lives of others. He saw the truth of it now, in the letters and emails he received from users who shared how the platform had changed their lives. A single idea, nurtured and shared, had grown into something far greater than himself. But with that realization came a sense of responsibility. Ethan knew the platform's success wasn't just about its technology, but about the trust people placed in it. It wasn't enough to connect people. He wanted those connections to mean something, to foster empathy and understanding in a world that often seemed fractured. The hum of the elevator broke his reverie. Turning, he saw Tim step out, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Figured you'd still be here," Tim said, handing one to Ethan. "Big day tomorrow." Ethan smiled, taking the cup. The next day would mark the platform's first major public event, a global conference aimed at bringing together users to share their stories and ideas for the future. It was a milestone Ethan hadn't dared to dream of during those long nights coding in his apartment. "Can you believe it?" Ethan said, his voice tinged with wonder. "We're really doing this." Tim grinned. "Honestly, yeah. I always knew you had it in you. I'm just glad you dragged me along for the ride." The two friends shared a laugh, the kind that only comes from years of shared struggle and triumph. For a moment, the weight of responsibility lifted, replaced by the simple joy of accomplishment. The conference was a resounding success. Held in a sunlit auditorium filled with people from all walks of life, it became a celebration of the platform's mission. Ethan listened to stories of connections forged across continents, of communities built in unlikely places, and of lives changed by the simple act of reaching out. One speaker, a young woman named Clara, shared how the platform had helped her reconnect with her estranged father. "For years, we didn't speak," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But through this, I found the courage to reach out. Now he's here today, sitting in the front row." The audience erupted into applause, and Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. Moments like this reminded him why he had returned, why he had chosen the path of struggle and growth over the ease of the ether. This was his purpose, not just to dream, but to make those dreams a reality that touched lives. That night, after the event had ended and the auditorium had emptied, Ethan stood on the rooftop of the venue, gazing at the stars. The crisp air carried a sense of clarity, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The ether felt closer than ever, its lessons woven into every choice he made. He thought of the luminous beings, their wisdom guiding him still. He wondered if they could see him now, if they knew how their guidance had shaped not just his life, but the lives of so many others. A soft breeze stirred, carrying with it a faint hum, a sound that reminded him of the vibrant pulse of the ether. Ethan closed his eyes, a small smile playing on his lips. He didn't need to see them to know they were there, watching, perhaps even celebrating his journey. When he opened his eyes, the horizon stretched before him, endless and full of promise. Ethan felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. His work was far from finished, but he no longer saw that as a burden. It was an opportunity, a chance to keep building, to keep connecting, to keep dreaming. And so, with his heart anchored in the present and his spirit gazing toward the future, Ethan Marsh stepped forward, ready to continue his voyage.